Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and remember, Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading another textbook, cover to cover. This is an American history textbook from guess what? You want to know what year it's from? Let me tell you. This textbook's from the year 1940. This is before we were in World War II. Are you kidding me? It's from a Catholic school, so it's going to have a little bit of Christianity in it. But either way, it is a nice contextualizing tool to see what it sounded like to be in school and learn about America in the year 1940. Here we are in Chapter 7, Section 5, which is Our Nation Grows, the Oregon Country. The far northwest, stretching along the Pacific coast from California to Alaska, was the Oregon Country, as the map shows. I mean, you can picture it, right? It was a rich land and much larger than our present state of Oregon. Both England and America claimed that Oregon Country. The claims to both nations were based on discovery exploration and some few settlements. Neither nation had many people living in Oregon, yet both nations insisted that they owned it. Okay, so here's the Oregon Country. Let me show you. So that goes well into Canada, as we know it today. A treaty was made between two countries. It gave both Americans and Englishmen the right to settle in Oregon. The Americans in large numbers commenced to go to the Oregon Country. The fame of the Oregon Country spread. People heard of its fertile soil and pleasant climate. Reports came of lovely valleys ready for the farmer, the fish and game in abundance, and fur-bearing animals for trappers. Men got the Oregon fever, it was called. The Great Migration. A very large band of Americans began to march to Oregon in 1843. This movement was called the Great Migration. A migration is a movement of people from one place to another. Independence in Missouri was the starting place. Independence in Missouri was the starting place of the Great Migration. There, the pioneers in their covered wagons assembled from all parts of the country. There they had their last chance to make repairs and get supplies. There the final plans were made. A captain was selected to head the party. A fur trader who knew the way was chosen as a guide to take the party over the Oregon Trail. Copyright 1989. The Oregon Trail. It was a good thing that careful preparations had been made. These brave pioneers were facing a 2,000-mile journey. They were to cross wide prairies and to pass around high mountains. They would be in danger from fierce and warlike Indians. It was necessary to guard against hunger and thirst and against heat and cold. Early on a May morning, the bugle gave the signal to start. Over 1,000 men, women, and children, ready and eager to go. Some rode on horseback, some traveled on prairie schooners, and the number of wagons was so great that it was decided to move in two divisions. Those owning a few cattle were to move to the light column. Those with large herds were to move to the cow column. Oh, they brought their cows with them? Whoa. The cow column. The business of moving was difficult. The entire party, light column, and the cow column had to be awake before dawn. In the light of early morning, the women cooked breakfast while the men rounded up the cattle. Everything in the wagons was lashed or fastened. The trail would be rough and bumpy. The oxen were yoked to the wagons, and bugle signal was given. The long train of wagons was on the move. "Yee-haw!" cried the drivers, that's what it says, to keep the oxen on their path. It was no easy task to drive the oxen. Well, this is very interesting to imagine, isn't it? Can you imagine? The long day. Some of the men went ahead to act as scouts. Others swung wide on each side to protect the column. The long line of cattle followed in the rear. The wagons were heavily loaded with furniture and farm tools. Each family carried everything they owned. The brave pioneer mothers tended their fretting children. All during the hot summer days, the party plodded on its weary way. The oxen were strong, but they moved very slowly. Preparations for the night. Before sunset, the signal to halt was given. The wagons were then placed to form a circle. The men chained their wagons together. Thus the wagons made quite a good fort. Sentinels were posted to look out for unfriendly Indians, and everybody else went to work. There were no idle hands in the party. Even the boys and girls were given something to do. There were cattle to be cared for, fires to be tended, and meal to be cooked. The families sat about the fires to eat evening meal. Dried beef and bacon formed their simple fare, except when a hunting party got good luck. Then everybody feasted on buffalo meat or prairie chicken. Hot corn cakes made at the fire were always welcome. Even before sundown, the fires and the lights were put out. Shining in the darkness, fires might be seen by Indians. Soon the weary travelers were sleeping. Only the lonely sentinels kept the watch. Weeks and weeks of travel, day by day, and rest by night. What? Weeks and weeks of travel by day and rest by night. The flat prairie country was passed. Then the party plodded through the more difficult mountain trails. After 6 months of hardship, the company finally reached Oregon. Later, the American followed these daring members. Later, other Americans followed these daring members of the Great Migration. So you're telling me the Great Migration is one event? The Great Migration happened once, and then people did it again. And just did the same trail, but that was Oregon Trail, the video game, was based off of one event of one group leaving, a large group, albeit. Well, that's a little bit of an interesting tidbit now, isn't it? The Oregon question. The lower Oregon country was now becoming settled with Americans. This gave the United States a good claim to it. We made an offer to England to divide Oregon, but no decision was reached. Then some hothead Americans demanded the whole Oregon country. 40, 50, or fight was their motto. That meant they wanted all the country north of the 44th degree of latitude. Notice on a wall map that Canada would have been cut off from the Pacific Ocean. England would fight rather than let this happen. Fortunately, an agreement was reached, and the Oregon country was divided at the 49th parallel of latitude. Our northern boundary east of the Rocky Mountains, the Treaty of 1846, made this the northern boundary west of the mountains. Father De Smet and Dr. McLaughlin. Two great characters. The story of the Oregon includes the names of two great men. Father Peter De Smet, S.J., the Apostle of the Rockies, and Dr. John McLaughlin, Father of Oregon. The Flatheads of the far-off Oregon country wanted a priest. Flatheads, who are they? A little band of these Indians made a long, dangerous trip to St. Louis to ask for a black robe. Father De Smet offered to go west to the Indians. When the Indians when an Indian to guide him, the good priest set out on horseback with. Okay, they met with a company of American fur traders and reached Oregon in 1841. Father De Smet preached the gospel to the Indians. He taught them to love Christ and to love one another. The Indians loved Father De Smet, and he understood them. He spent the rest of his life with the Indians in the Oregon country. He preached to them, taught them, and cared for them. This is Father De Smet's beautiful description of Christmas midnight among the Indians. The signal for rising was the firing of a pistol. This was followed by a general discharge of guns in honor of the birth of the infant Savior, Jesus Christ. Then 300 voices from the midst of the forest intoned the beautiful canticle, "The Almighty's glory all things proclaim." In a moment, the multitude of adorers were seen on their way to the humble temple of the Lord. Dr. John McLaughlin. The Hudson Bay Company was a great fur trading concern of Canada. This company was bitterly opposed to American settlements in Oregon. Settlers cut down the forests and tilled the soil. This drove away wild fur-bearing animals. Strange to say, the Americans in Oregon found their best friend in one who was employed by the Hudson Bay Company. He was Dr. John McLaughlin. Dr. John McLaughlin was born in Canada but studied medicine in Scotland. When he returned to Canada, he decided not to practice as a doctor. The Great Wild West attracted him. He was employed by the Hudson Bay Company in Oregon as a manager. Oregon was a desolate and dangerous place when John McLaughlin arrived. It was worth a man's life to travel about the country. People moved in large, well-armed parties to protect themselves from the Indians. Some white people had mistreated, even murdered the Indians. This made the Indians eager for revenge. The Dr. McLaughlin soon changed all this. His kindly ways won the friendship of the Indians. While he was in charge of the Hudson Bay Company, the Indians stopped fighting with the whites and among themselves, Americans in Oregon. Later, the Americans began to arrive. They were opening up a new country. Frequently, things went wrong. They needed help. Dr. McLaughlin was kind to the Americans. The Hudson Bay Company sternly warned him. The English company did not approve of his friendly relations with Americans. McLaughlin preferred doing good to making money. He would not give up helping people, even when they were Americans. He resigned from the Hudson Bay Company so that he could be free to help whenever help was needed. The father of Oregon, Dr. McLaughlin, continued to help Americans in many ways. He gave them seed for new farms and other supplies. Much of his time was spent doctoring the sick. He brought about a better feeling between the Canadians and Americans. He can well be called the father of Oregon. Now, folks, I hope you have a lovely day, but I did forget to do my due diligence earlier and say, at about the 3-minute mark, if you're enjoying this content, please subscribe. So I'm going to say it now. If you've made it this far in this video, please subscribe. God bless. Goodbye. Have a good day. Enjoy your evening or morning or afternoon.